Keep on riding with us as we continue to broadcast the balance and defend the discourse from these Hip Hop Weekly studios. Welcome back to Civic Cipher. Once again, I am your host, Ramses Ja. Big shout out to my man Q Ward, who could not be here today. And I know he is kicking himself because we have a very special guest with us today on Civic Cipher. The man goes by the name of Qasim Rashid, and he is an author, activist, and attorney who is running for Illinois' 11th Congressional District and a constantly viral social media presence who uses his social media platforms for activism, the kind that you would know and love. Welcome back with us. We certainly have a lot more to talk about. And again, it is an honor to have you on the show today, sir.
Privileged to be here, Ramsey. It's great to be with you, brother.
Thank you, man. So please be sure to stick around for that. We're going to be discussing his campaign specifically in the state of Illinois. And there's a whole lot of questions we haven't gotten to yet. So a lot to stay tuned for. But before we get there, we are going to discuss, as always, BA, Becoming a Better Ally, BABA. And today's BABA is sponsored by Friends of the Movement. You can sign up for the free voter wallet from FOTMglobal.com to support Black businesses and allied businesses, as well as make an impact with your spending. Again, that's FOTMglobal.com. And today we're going to talk about Erica Gaines, who is the president and CEO of a company called TAC Mobility. And you're going to want to hear about this. Controlling the Mind and the Machine, a training program whose vision is to heal the racial divide between people of color and police officers through law enforcement, wellness, and community dialogue. While an unlikely candidate to advocate for police, this dark-skinned multiracial woman from Phoenix, Arizona continues to use her voice to talk about trauma recovery, self-awareness, and suicide, the #1 cop killer in America. With inadequate clinical research to pull from, in 2019, Erica created the world's most extensive ongoing study of law enforcement officers and cumulative stress. Armed with data in 2020, Erica created a 4-hour peace officer standards and training training course accredited through the National Certification Program, developed by the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training. The training program and fiscally sponsored nonprofit TAC Mobility, Controlling the Mind and the Machine, offers stress and trauma awareness, rehabilitative stretching, and self-awareness to police officers in the United States. With her straightforward approach, Erica uses TAC Mobility to heal traumatized officers in an effort to bring communities closer. She believes that supporting the mental and physical health of officers ultimately brings support back to the community, enabling them to balance compassion, courage, and empathy. And we are very critical of police on this show, but we do recognize and respect that police are human beings, and as a result, they are our brothers and sisters. So again, check out TAC Mobility if you wish to become a better ally and give her some support. All right, Qasim, it has been a pleasure to get to know you, sir. You were everything that I was expecting. Now let's shift gears here. Sure. And let's talk about your campaign. What makes you different from your opponent, Bill Foster?
Well, I think just about everything that Democrats and Americans care about. He grew up quite wealthy. I grew up low income. I know the struggle of economic injustice, of housing and food insecurity, of working since I was 15. In Congress, the running joke is that the one thing that's similar about us is that he and I have both passed the same number of bills in Congress, which is 0. He hasn't passed a single piece of legislation as lead sponsor if you exclude post offices, which that's your thing. Okay. But on policy, we see a massive contrast. I'm fighting for guaranteed universal health care. He is heavily funded by the health insurance companies and refuses universal health care. He's a for-profit kind of guy. Mm-hmm. I'm taking the climate crisis seriously and calling for a 2030 carbon neutrality. He's shooting for 2050, which climate scientists tell us is too late. He's pro-fracking, pro-drilling, pro-Exxon, pro-carbon capture, which is a debunked technology. On civil rights, I think civil rights are sacred. I strongly support H.R. 40, the bill to study reparations. I strongly support ending the George W. Bush Patriot Act, which has been used to conduct warrantless searches on U.S. citizens over the last 20 years, disproportionately Black and brown people. I strongly support protecting disability rights. He voted to strip down disability rights. I strongly support ending aid that has been used by the Israeli government to detain Palestinian children. He refuses to co-sponsor that bill. Let's talk bank regulations. While I'm a human rights lawyer, I did spend 4 years working on bank regulatory compliance. It is as boring as it sounds, but it's also critical to protect consumers.
Sure.
I gave him credit for voting for Dodd-Frank in 2008, but then he decided to vote with Donald Trump to deregulate banks. And I think that was a terrible vote. It also helped enable the bank collapse we saw last year. I take the opioid crisis seriously. I've lost loved ones to the opioid crisis. He is funded it to the tune of $500,000 from the same companies like Walgreens who are causing the opioid crisis. You can Google the article right now. Walgreens just settled a $230 million lawsuit for enabling mass death via illegal opioid prescriptions. The list just goes on and on. But fundamentally, the difference between Bill Foster and I comes down to this principle. Every vote and policy decision I make is based on what the facts tell us and what will benefit working families. Every vote and policy he takes depends on whether a corporation is funding him for that vote or not. And I gave some examples earlier where you can see him vote the right way, take corporate money, and then vote the wrong way. In law school, they teach you that you recuse yourself if there's a conflict of interest, and you recuse yourself when there's even a perception of a conflict of interest. And so I want voters to know that by supporting my campaign and by electing me, they will know that every vote I make will be 100% and exclusively accountable to what working people need us to do as elected officials. This is why I think he has been hesitant is probably too generous of a word even to show up to debate. He committed to 3, canceled all 3, showed up last minute to a 4th one, and then midway through, just 30 minutes into it, gets up and says, I have to be somewhere else, and just left the debate midway through. It was extremely shocking for me. But this is what I mean. We are ready to not only defend our record, but make the argument on facts and science as to why our platform is better aligned with the needs of working people. Bill Foster wants voters to vote for a record that even he isn't willing to defend. So it's no wonder to me that he's not showing up, because if I had a record like his, I wouldn't show up either.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's, I don't want to get dirty here, but at a point, caution borders on cowardice. And at a time like this, where the country is so politically divided, and we really do need to get on the same page about listening to real human beings, real American citizens who go to work and then they go home and they have a repair in the kitchen and they have to go shopping for their kids over the weekend, and then they have a birthday party to get to on Saturday. Those people that live day-to-day lives, for those people who make up the fabric of this country to not be heard, and to then have a candidate come up and say, hey, listen, I'm listening to you, and the incumbent will not debate me. Again, that word cowardice comes into play. And I know you mentioned the reasons for that, as did I. There's money in politics, and there's a lot at stake. But the one thing that I've come to appreciate about certain politicians is the ones that say, listen, I don't need to do this job forever. I just need to do this job until the job is fixed. And then there's a different set of politicians who are career politicians who say, I need to do this forever. So I need to make sure that I keep the money moving, and I keep, enough support from enough people to where it doesn't look like I'm as corrupt or as morally compromised, or indeed morally bankrupt, as I truthfully am. And this is true not just for Republicans, but this is true in all of politics. And so that's one of the things that at least I found frustrating with respect to your back and forth with Bill Foster, because that was something that I was hoping to see. And the truth is, I don't even live in Illinois. It just is something that was necessary. So, your response, and then we'll move on.
Well, I think it's in the nature of Americans to want to be able to compare and contrast.
Yeah.
We like choices. We want to know what the options are. It's why you go to the grocery store and there's 200 kinds of cereal, right? We like having our options, and we don't like being told this is the only option and everything else is off limits. Yeah. So, I will say this about Bill Foster, that at the end of the day, he is accountable to the American people. I mean, I think he knows that. And, we made a commitment at the start of this campaign that we are going to be unassailable, meaning every critique we make will be on policy. I'm not going to mudsling. I'm not going to name call. At an event a couple of nights ago, he flat out called me a liar. And what's unfortunate about that is one, I think is beneath the dignity of politics, because he didn't give any examples of what are misrepresented, because he can't. But more importantly, it's one thing to not show up to defend your record. It's another thing to then just say, well, he's lying without any explanation or excuse.
Yeah.
I don't think the American people appreciate that. Yeah. And I'm not going to respond in kind. I'm not going to call him names. I think people are sick and tired of the divisiveness.
Yeah.
I think they want adults in the room making these decisions. And I will say this, I'm not running for money or power or fame or prestige. There's a reason why our campaign slogan is "Justice Can't Wait." When you think about the person who's suffering from asthma under the climate crisis, we can't tell them to wait till 2050. When you talk about the fact that Black Americans are arrested 7 times the rate of white Americans, despite having lower crime rates, you can't tell them wait a little bit longer. You talk about the woman who has breast cancer and can't get treatment, or the woman who needs reproductive health care but doesn't have access. You can't tell them to wait. We need to act now. And earlier you asked me what's the difference between me and Bill Foster. He admits that he didn't even get involved into politics until well into his 50s, when he'd already made tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
It must be nice to have that kind of privilege. I grew up wondering where my next meal was going to come from. I knew from an early age that I needed to be actively engaged in the community here and now. And I consider it my distinct privilege that from a low-income background, I'm at a place where my wife, Aisha, and I are doing well enough for ourselves, but we see these issues of wealth and income inequality worse now than they were 30 years ago. Sure. The climate crisis worse now. The opioid crisis worse now. Race relations worse now. And that's not going to be fixed by delaying and saying it'll come in due time. We need to be active and deliberate now to make it happen.
Now, I want to get a couple more things fleshed out here, because you did a very good job of covering many of the things that you're campaigning on, many of the things that you want to affect once you're elected. Sure. On this show, we have conversations about lots of different things, and some of these things we haven't been able to touch on yet. So I want to get your thoughts on, it's called American history in our estimation, but it's been rebranded as critical race theory. What are your thoughts on the recent attacks on critical race theory? And what would you do if you could do anything to impact what's going on with respect to CRT in this country? Well, or at least in Illinois.
This is right-wing outrage on a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And it just kind of manufactured outrage in this space. This is a college level, law school level course that looks at the role that race has in how our legislation has been passed and the systemic injustices that exist as a result of that. To put it in a simpler term, this is about how systems of oppression have been built and sustained for racial oppression. It's not about saying, hey, you white person individually, you're racist. That's a nonsensical way of looking at it. But I go even a step further and say, if you think teaching children about America's history of racism will shame white kids, then you need to answer a question. Because yes, white people were enslavers, but there were also white people who were abolitionists, like John Brown.
Sure.
If you think teaching about America's history of racism will shame white children, you need to answer why you think those kids will associate more with the enslavers than with John Brown. You're projecting, you're telling on yourself at that stage of the game. And so for me, this is about understanding history in a way that is constructive, that doesn't beat anyone down. That's never been the point of history, is to understand why things happened the way they happened and how we prevent them from happening again in the future. And I've long said one of the reasons why we're here today as a country is because, unlike South Africa, for example, or unlike even Germany, which I'm not going to hold either country as some beacon of tolerance and prosperity. However, both those countries had a history lesson to reconcile.
Yeah, they reconciled. They had a conversation about it.
Exactly. And it's actively taught in their schools. We've never had a reckoning for the genocide of Native Americans, or for the enslavement and mass murder and trafficking of Africans and then African Americans, or the internment and concentration camps of Japanese Americans. We had a reckoning for the outright ban on Asian immigration or the lynching that Black and Latino Americans went through, none of that actually, there was no reparations paid. I mean, for God's sake, Tulsa survivors are still with us, and a court ruled that they are not qualified for reparations. So until and unless we can have some kind of reckoning in that space with actual monetary value transferred to those who've been marginalized, I don't know if we're going to be able to truly heal race relations in this country. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to work towards that space and build capacity so that this younger generation knows that they control the reins into the future and they can bring about those changes. You know, justice delayed is justice denied, but that doesn't mean that we prevent justice from being implemented in the future. It can still happen if we go after it aggressively.
You know, there's a post that I came across, might have been earlier today, in fact, and it says, the people who threw rocks at Ruby Bridges for trying to go to school are now upset their grandchildren might have to learn about them throwing rocks at Ruby Bridges for trying to go to school.
Exactly.
And it's so interesting because this year she's 69 years old. And so for the folks that really push back against, again, we're going to call it what it is, American history, the teaching of American history in the, you know, K through 12 grades that has been rebranded as CRT. For those folks that push back against that, there's often a sense of shame that they associated with it that, as you mentioned, may not necessarily translate to their children. They may not identify as the rock throwers in the story. They might identify as an entirely separate group of people. And this is the way that my youth, you know, because I learned all this stuff, that's the way I thought about it. And I saw, you know, my non-Black classmates responding to it. So that's a very interesting perspective. I'm also appreciative of how you connected that with the conversation about reparations, because again, by not having that racial reckoning, we covered something recently on the show here. It might have been 2 or 3 weeks ago where we talked about the different reparations that were paid in this country to Native Americans, to enslavers for loss of property, to, you know, Japanese Americans, to reparations paid to the descendants of the people in the Holocaust and the people who were in the Holocaust. And, you know, and they had the total, we had the total of the amount paid by the government, you know, and adjusted for, you know, inflation and, you know, how money works. And then it got down to the bottom, the reparations paid to Black Americans, and that was $0. And when you look at it in terms of the actual harm done just by the act of slavery by itself, it's immeasurable. But even if we take slavery out of the equation, on this show, we discuss everything that followed that. We discuss everything from, you know, the Black codes and Jim Crow and the civil rights movement, to redlining, to the war on drugs, to, as you mentioned, you know, over policing, disproportionate arrest rates, judicial sentencing, you know, on and on and on. And then, you know, more recently, we're finding out the impacts of environmental racism and how that factors into healthcare outcomes for Black and brown people in this country. And so it's just a very interesting segue to go from why folks are banning CRT and why we need to push back against that, to the conversation about economic restorative justice, or, you know, in truth, reparations. And so one last thing I want to ask you, and that's about affirmative action. You know, the Supreme Court recently overturned, you know, a very, and it's kind of a sad day for a lot of us, you know, who we're happy to have that built into the equation to kind of offset some of the historic injustices that we've endured. I'm not trying to debate the question for you, but give us your thoughts on that, and, you know, what, if anything, you would do if elected, you know, about that.
Well, I will start again with a contrast. When affirmative action was repealed by the Supreme Court, my opponent didn't think it was important enough to talk about or condemn that rule, which says a lot about his view of reparations, of justice for Black people in general. And I spoke extensively about this issue. I mean, the irony of it all, right? That affirmative action has actually benefited white women more than Black and brown and Asian people combined. I mean, just statistically speaking, because it's not just about education, it's also in the workforce as well. And women, until the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, women didn't have basic economic access in this country, white or black. Two, affirmative action was never about admitting unqualified Black people. It was about ensuring that qualified Black people also got access.
Considered, yeah.
I mean, and basic consideration. People talking about unqualified people getting admission, that's not affirmative action, that's legacy admissions.
Mm-hmm.
A recent study
that benefits white folks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because legacy admissions is if your grandfather went into Harvard and during Jim Crow when Black people weren't allowed, you get automatic admission or you get preferential treatment. A recent study showed that 43% of white admittance to Harvard University were legacy admissions.
Sure.
And 3/4 of them would not have qualified on their own merit. And so if you do the comparison, it's like a 10x factor. So even if you go with the incredulous argument that affirmative action admitted unqualified people, even with that ridiculous argument, the number of white people getting admission through legacy is 10x that.
Yeah.
But you never hear anybody complain about that. That's a non-issue. The issue is this misperception that a Black person got admission. And then look, I think fundamentally it also speaks to just the systemic racism that we're facing here.
Fantastic. Well, do us a favor. Let everyone know how they can connect with you, how they can support you, how they can support your campaign on the ground and around the country. Thank you. And let's make sure that we have everybody tapped in.
Thank you. And what's beautiful about our campaign is we are building a coalition, Black, white, brown, people of all faiths and backgrounds. We're working together. And that's the key element that I want to focus on, that we solve these issues by working together across faith, race, gender, socioeconomic status. That's how we build a more perfect union. You can visit us at my website, www.qasimrashid.com. I'm on social media at Qasim Rashid, QASIMRASHID. And reach out to us. Let's get involved. And if you're in the district, in Illinois or in the Northern Illinois area, and you're looking for some extra work, we're starting canvassers at $20 an hour. Paying a decent wage to get folks engaged. So get involved, get engaged, and let's win this election. Because why? Because justice can't wait.
Well, best wishes to you on your campaign. I know that it's impossible for me to make a recommendation to our listeners, but I wish everyone well. How about that? And I would love to thank you again for taking the time to be on the show. It really means a lot to us. And if we can, let's do it again soon. All right.
Amen, brother. Thank you for having us. God bless.
Thank you so much. If you want to find anything that we missed on today's episode, do us a favor, hit the website, civiccipher.com. Check out anything that you missed. Of course, you can download this and any previous episodes. Be sure to follow us on social media. And until next week, y'all. Peace.